Hey, everybody. Chuck Scoggins here with the Church Memo podcast. Hey, today we have a special treat for you. We are talking to my friend, Phil Bowdle. Phil is the creative arts pastor at Westridge Church just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And we're talking about what they're doing to connect with people during this coronavirus, stay-at-home, isolation, disruption. We're particularly talking about how they are connecting with their volunteers and keeping all of those people that they will need once church resumes meeting in a building, how they're keeping all of those people connected and engaged. So I think you're going to enjoy this. I do want to say one thing. We're recording these interviews over Zoom video conferencing. And so the audio quality might not be the total best that we've ever had, but I still think the content is good enough and you can listen past a little bit of audio quality issues to really benefit from this. So without any further ado, here is my interview with Phil. Phil, man, thanks for taking a few minutes to chat with me today. I appreciate you giving up a little bit of your time.
My pleasure. Thanks, Chuck.
So, things have shifted, things have changed for the church a little bit. And it's Easter week, so, crazy. But I just thought it would be good for our audience to hear, in general, how has this disruption impacted you guys at Westridge?
Well, we try as a church, and especially as a creative team and the team that I get to lead, we try to be ahead of things. We try to be thinking not weeks, but really months in advance and making sure we're leading and setting up our ministries, our church for success. And all of that any sense of plans have just gone out the window, like most churches. So, it's affecting really everything that we do. But, I would say in some ways, it's also deepening the vision and values we have as a church anyway, if it's not really changing those things. For us as a creative team, our mission statement, our why, the reason we do what we do is just to put Jesus on display. That still works when we're just doing online services and online gatherings and reaching people on social media. Our mission is still the same, is to put Jesus on display. Our why as a church is to lead people to become fully devoted followers of Jesus. Guess what? That doesn't change with the current reality of where we're at. Now, our context, our emphasis, the way we do that looks very different right now. It's been very disrupted, but yeah, our why still remains the same. So in a lot of ways, it's been interesting of how much it's disrupted, but at the same time, it's been interesting to see our whole staff pivot to be able to say, hey, our methods are going to change, but our why isn't changing. We're still in this for the same reasons we were in it before this crisis. And how do we take hold of one of the greatest opportunities we've had ever, where people are really need the church. It's been a really cool chance for us as the church to be the church and point people to Jesus through this. Yeah, we're just seeing some really cool stories about how God's using this time. It's definitely, for me, I've seen a lot of friends say, post things like, wow, I'm just so glad for this season in some ways of being able to slow down and be quiet and be still. And, I try not to throw my phone across the room when I read that stuff. But the reality is, for most of our staff, we've never worked harder than we have in this last little bit. We are hustling and working really, really hard and innovating on the fly and taking it day by day and week by week. But it's worth it, because we're just seeing God use this season in some really crazy, fruitful ways. We just reviewed as a leadership team this last two weeks. We've had 15 people accept Christ in our services. And that's a little bit above average even of where we are typically each week for the rest of the year. So, man, just God's still moving. It's disrupting how we're doing it, but he's still moving in really powerful ways.
How are you getting that feedback of people accepting Christ through online services? How does that?
Yeah, so great question. So we made the pivot about a little over a year ago of moving all of that response, the next step response of salvation to be done through text. So they don't, it's not, they can still accept Jesus without texting us, but if we just ask them to follow up with us by texting our phone number, texting follow to our phone number. And that allows us to actually get their name, get their contact information, and actually directly follow up with them Where before, when we didn't have that system and it was all paper driven, we could see about 100 hands raised on the Easter service weekend, but we may get 1 or 2 connection cards on that. And so when we changed our method there, it really changed everything about how we follow up with people and actually help them take their next steps after they've accepted Christ. So it's been interesting to see.
That's cool. That little nugget right there might be really valuable for somebody listening to this. So that's cool to hear. So when this is all over, when they say you can leave your house again, do you see things going back to the way they were, or do you think we've gone to a new normal?
I think normal is going to look way different in the future than it has looked 2 months ago. I think, you're not going to undo what's been done. And so I think you're going to see a lot of people, regardless of what, our culture is looking like, of what social distancing looks like and all these things. I mean, what the regulations look like. I think you're going to see a lot of people that are more engaged with the church than they were before this crisis, but they are also going to engage differently than they did before this crisis. So for us as the church, I think we need to be pivoting to know it may mean that online small groups are a thing now, but they're also going to be a thing in the future. It may mean for churches that are ramping up their online gatherings, for their services that they didn't have before, that may be still a thing in the future and still an on-ramp for people to get engaged with your church. So I don't see those things changing. But what I think what our churches need to be changing is making sure that we have a physical and digital communication strategy that work cohesively together. And I think a lot of churches are realizing now that they weren't quite prepared for that. They're having to microwave some of that strategy right now and try to do it as fast as they can. That needs to become the new normal, is knowing that some people are not going to be knocking on your front doors first. They're going to be knocking on your online stream. They're going to be checking you out for weeks or months before they ever may step foot in the front doors of your church, if they ever do. And so the question is, what are you going to do when they get there? And so that needs to become our norm, because that is the norm of our culture. That has been that way already, but we're just kind of catching up in a lot of ways too. And I think that's got to be our posture, is knowing wherever they come, wherever they knock on the door, whether that's Facebook or website or Facebook Live or Instagram or to our front doors, that we need to be listening and ready to help them take a next step toward Jesus.
And in your book, you even talk about, how people are, showing up for church 10 times a year, 12 times a year, if they're really committed, maybe 14 times a year. And so I think you're right. I think there'll be a certain segment of society that comes rushing back. And I think there's that segment of society who wasn't coming a whole lot anyway. And this is probably going to give them an opportunity to come less. So thinking through, how do we still engage with them? Mm-hmm. I think you're right on. Question I really wanted to ask you, the reason I want to get on this call with you was, what are you guys at Westridge doing to stay connected to your volunteer teams?
Yeah, great question. I think, typically when they put your volunteer hat on, and most people, when they hear from their church, it's because the church needs something from them to go serve for something, to sign up to do something. And I think through this crisis, what we've had to lean into as a church is we want to take the posture of just making sure that a big church feels small, and that we're hustling and working hard to actually make direct contact with every person that calls our church home, especially our volunteers, and really just ask 2 questions. And this is what we've been doing. We've been just asking 2 questions of, 1, how are you doing? And 2, how can we pray for you? And nothing about what they can do for us. It's just, we just want to have that posture of making sure we genuinely care about people, because we do. But sometimes we don't always take enough time to actually do the one-to-one contact that we need. So for our volunteer base, for our teams, we've mobilized every team leader, every person that's in directing ministry, to either have them or somebody in their leadership pipeline, somebody they've equipped to be able to help communicate to their team. We're making sure that everybody is connecting with individually each person that's on this team, and ask those 2 questions. And Chuck, man, the conversations that we've gotten from this have been unreal. Not only from our volunteers, but just we've done the same thing for every person in our church. We have I think it's 14,000 names that were on a Google Doc that we're going through and calling one by one. But it's probably one of the hardest things we've done through this whole crisis, but it's probably been the most important thing. And we were just reminded time and time again of how God uses those brief little moments that we can have. It may be a 2-minute phone call, but we're just amazed by how God's showing up and intervening and being a part of those conversations. We heard a story just a few days ago of a lady who had just called the doctor saying that she was having some early pregnancy complications. She was about 15 weeks in and she was afraid she was having a miscarriage, and called the doctor, and they said, "Hey, we really encourage you not to come into the hospital right now because of the COVID-19 virus right now." So she was freaking out, and about as soon as she hung up that phone, one of our team members gave her a call and just said, "Hey, how are you doing? How can we pray for you?" And she got to share what was going on, and they got to just pray with each other. And she wrote back and shared later with us of just saying that phone call meant so much to me, not only because I've been symptom free since that moment, but just knowing that my church actually cares for me in this moment is what I needed. So I really think for the care that we're putting into our volunteers and to our church, we're going to see the effects of that for weeks and months to come, because they know that their church, the big church in town, actually does love and care for them. So that would just be my encouragement for everybody listening, is sometimes the hard work, the making the individual call instead of sending the email out to hundreds of people, sometimes that's worth it. That's the most strategic thing you can do, because nothing replaces that one-to-one connection that you can have as a church. So it takes time, but it's worth it.
Yeah, and it's probably a good practice to make those calls and ask those 2 questions when we're not in quarantine and separated and
exactly.
Isolated. So it's probably a good practice anyway, but yeah, I can see where that could be. And it made me think when you were talking, I think small churches sometimes think, man, we're not West Ridge. We don't have all the fancy streaming equipment and, we can't do this whole thing well, but this is actually an opportunity for you to lean into your smallness, because you as the pastor can pick up the phone and call those 100 people and ask those 2 questions. And so I think sometimes small churches feel like, we're not West Ridge, but lean into it.
Yeah, you got the advantage as a small church. I don't know many people that go to any church because of how many people are there. They go because of how God's using that church for their own growth and development. They go for relationships, but most of the time they go because they feel like they're known and they're cared for there. And so you can do that at a small church, but you can also not do that at a small church. I've been to churches of less than 100 that felt more isolating and unwelcoming than churches of 10,000. And so, it's not a size issue; it's a care issue.
Wow, that's good. I want to wrap this up, but is there anything just in general you guys are learning that just in closing thoughts, that you think other churches might benefit from that you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, we've hit on a lot of it, but I think right now the thing that we've been seeing a lot of fruit from is we've changed up a lot of what we've been doing on social media, and we're doing a lot of things that really don't take a whole lot of work, but a lot of money even, but just take a little bit of planning to be able to help keep engagement going during the week. So we've been doing simple things like a Monday morning devotional with our pastor on Monday morning, a Tuesday night conversation with a thought leader or ministry leader that is help addressing a question that people are dealing with. Like last night, we did a call with our kids pastor that was just talking about how to prepare your kids for Easter week, even though it looks different. Wednesday night, we're doing a prayer gathering. Thursday, we're doing a Q&A with our senior pastor. And just a number of little things that we're just using some basic technology that's free or cheap that people can utilize right now. And the encouragement, I would say, for especially leaders, is knowing that right now is a chance to scale your leadership more so than ever before. And if you can think smart about how to use some of the tools and resources that God's given us right now, like Facebook, like Instagram, like Twitter, all these things, you might be able to reach more people than you ever reached before. But it's going to just take you being willing to rethink maybe how you did things before too. And I promise the more that you put Jesus on display through all those things, the more that God's going to use that, and you're going to see fruit from it. So I just keep innovating. You don't get stuck in how you're doing, and don't go back to how you did things before just because it was comfortable. Lean into those things right now that God's given us, and I think we're going to see the greatest days for the church ahead of us. Because I'm even though it's scary right now, even though things are a little bit crazy in our culture and our country, I've never been more energized and excited for the church, because I'm seeing. I think this Easter that we're about to be heading into, I think we're going to have more people. It could be the most evangelistic day in our that our world has ever seen, by how many people are going to be tuning in or have access to hear the gospel. That's a big deal, And so I think this is our time to be the church. It's our time to step up by how we care for people, how we connect with people and communicate. So just, what you're doing, whatever everybody, wherever the seat they are that they're sitting in, what they do never has mattered more. So keep leaning in, keep hustling hard, keep putting Jesus on display.
Wow, that's great. Thank you for that encouragement and that message of hope, and for what you're doing personally and what Westridge is doing. And appreciate you taking a few minutes to encourage our listeners.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much to my friend Phil for taking the time to be with us today. By the way, Phil has a great book called Rethink Communication. And it's funny, that book was produced about a year ago, but I was flipping through it in preparation for today's interview, and there's so much in that book that is extremely relevant for us today, even during this time of quarantine. So I really recommend that you pick it up if you haven't read it. Again, it's called Rethink Communication, and it's really, really good. Well, that's all we have for today. Hopefully you've enjoyed this conversation, and I look forward to talking with you soon. Again, my name's Chuck, and go lead your church well.